The marble steps of the federal courthouse were meant for solemn arrivals, judges in robes, lawyers with briefcases, citizens seeking justice. But that morning, the air cracked with a sound no one expected. "Get out of here!" The shout came from a uniformed officer, his hand slicing the space between order and humiliation. In the same motion, his palm struck across a black woman's cheek, sharp and loud, the kind of sound that turns a crowd into stone. Gasps rippled across the steps. Phones rose instantly like a field of witnesses, red recording lights flickering against the cold stone columns. Some students from the nearby law school froze mid-conversation, their eyes darting between fear and disbelief. The woman didn't stumble. She didn't cry out. She stood perfectly still, a beige coat draped over her shoulders, arms folded across a black leather briefcase pressed to her side. Silence wrapped around her like armor. Her eyes, calm, steady, unshaken, met the officer's rage head-on. Another cop flanked her left, gripping her arm. A third blocked her path, chest heaving as if she were an intruder in sacred ground. The officer who struck her leaned close, jaw tight, voice spitting heat. "You don't belong here. This isn't your place." She inhaled once, slow, unhurried. No retort, no protest, only presence. From the back of the crowd, a man in a gray suit raised his phone higher, angling for a clear shot. His lips moved in a whisper meant only for the microphone. "They just hit her. Outside federal court. Everyone can see this." The officers didn't notice him. They were too consumed with proving their dominance. One of them grabbed her briefcase, yanked it from her hand, and tossed it down the steps. The thud against stone echoed like a gavel gone wrong. Murmurs grew louder. She didn't even fight back. Why are they doing this? That's assault. Still, the woman's silence held. It wasn't empty. It was deliberate. A silence weighted with history, with memory, with years of being questioned in rooms she owned, being doubted in halls she had built. The officer barked again, louder this time, as if volume could disguise fear. "Arrest her for trespassing." Her chin lifted by a fraction, enough to shift the air around her. For the first time, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, slicing through the jeers and whispers. "Check who I am first." Hem. The crowd stilled. Even the officers hesitated, their grip faltering just for a breath. The man with the phone repeated her words under his breath, as though committing them to evidence. "Check who I am first." In that instant, the scene was no longer just an arrest. It was a trial without a courtroom, and the gavel, the final word, was waiting in her silence. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Alexandra Reed. The officers saw just another face they could dismiss, but the truth was walking beside her in every step. Her name was Alexandra Reed, 41 years old, CEO of Reed Global Initiatives, a multi-billion-dollar nonprofit that rebuilt courthouses in 5 states after federal funding collapsed. 3 weeks earlier, she had also been sworn in as the youngest black woman appointed to the federal bench in her district. None of that was printed on her beige coat or stitched into her briefcase. That morning, she had chosen simplicity on purpose. No entourage, no flashing badges, no black cars. Just her, the leather case in her hand, and a silence stronger than sirens. She walked those marble steps like she had walked them 100 times before, except this time, she didn't come as an observer, or a donor, or even a lawyer. She came as the presiding judge scheduled to hear the very case that day, and yet here she stood, accused of trespassing at her own courtroom. Her calm wasn't an accident. It was memory. At 23, fresh out of law school, she was escorted out of a courthouse lobby because the clerk assumed she was waiting for a relative. At 29, she was denied entry to a closed hearing even though her name was on the counsel list. At 35, a bailiff once whispered to her, "Delivery staff enter through the back," as she carried binders for oral argument. Every time, she swallowed the insult, stored it like ammunition, and moved forward. Now, standing beneath the columns of the courthouse, she carried all those moments inside her silence. That was why her hands didn't shake when the officer's palm met her cheek. That was why her voice, when it finally came, cut deeper than any shout, "Check who I am first." The briefcase lying on the steps wasn't just leather. Inside it sat the day's docket, rulings prepared, evidence logged. the very heartbeat of the proceedings that she was meant to oversee. And still, 3 armed men treated her like a trespasser. From the crowd, a law student whispered to her friend, "She looks familiar." Another muttered, "I think she's someone important." The man in the gray suit, still recording, tightened his grip on the phone as if he already knew the storm was shifting. Alexandra's silence was not weakness. It was the courtroom she carried within herself. Before we dive deeper, let me ask you this. Have you ever been mistaken for less than you are because of how you looked or what you wore? If you've lived that moment, drop a yes in the comments. And if you believe no one should be stripped of dignity at the doors of justice, hit that like button right now. Because in this courthouse, the judgment had already begun and not against her. The slap should have ended it. At least that's what the officers thought. One sharp blow, one loud command, and the problem would disappear into the crowd. But the problem didn't flinch. She didn't lower her head. She simply existed, calm and unbroken. And that calm was louder than any siren. The officer who struck her shifted uneasily, as if his hand had betrayed him. His partner tightened his grip on her arm, trying to force her down the steps. "Move along," he barked, voice cracked with frustration. "This isn't for you." But Alexandra didn't budge. Her shoes held the stone like anchors. The crowd stirred again, murmurs now sharper, phones rising higher. A young woman near the back whispered, "She's not resisting. Why are they still dragging her?" The third officer, taller, angrier, stepped forward. He shoved a finger toward her face, then toward the courthouse doors. "You're trespassing," he shouted. "This is restricted entry. Arrest her." The word arrest sliced through the air, absurd and heavy. Murmurs turned to outrage. A man in a hoodie shook his head, muttering loud enough for cameras to catch. Arrest? For walking into a court? One officer bent down, grabbed her briefcase from the steps, and shook it as if proof of guilt would tumble out. He sneered. "What's in here, huh? Fake papers? Someone else's ID?" Then he tossed it down again, the leather scraping against stone, papers shifting inside. Gasps rippled. A woman near the columns covered her mouth. "That's evidence," she whispered. "That's official." Still, Alexandra said nothing. Her silence pulled the moment taut, like a bowstring ready to snap. She remembered the times she'd been told to use the service entrance, to sit in the back, to wait outside. Those memories didn't weaken her, they steadied her. The officer's radio crackled. "Unit 5, do you copy?" a dispatcher's voice asked. He ignored it, leaning in close enough for his shadow to swallow her face. "People like you don't get to walk in here like you own it," he growled. The irony burned, but Alexandra didn't bite. Her only movement was a slow lift of her chin, a reminder that dignity could tower even when wrists were bound. From the steps, the man in the gray suit kept recording. He muttered for his mic again. "They just called her a trespasser. They don't even know—" He didn't finish, but the crowd's restless energy said it for him. Escalation wasn't just happening between officers and one woman. It was happening in the air, in the shifting weight of witnesses realizing something was deeply wrong. The courthouse doors loomed only feet away, but at that moment they felt miles apart. Justice was on the other side, but injustice had built a wall right there on the steps. And with every shove, every insult, that wall grew taller. Before we continue, what would you have done standing in that crowd? Filmed, shouted, or stayed silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because silence has power, but so does speaking up. The officers thought they had control, but Alexandra Reed was about to remind them that power doesn't live in a badge, it lives in truth. They expected screaming. They expected thrashing arms, wild protests, desperate pleas. That would have justified their grip, their shove, their threat of arrest. But Alexandra Reed gave them nothing of the sort. She stood in silence. Her cheek still stung from the slap, but she didn't lift a hand to touch it. Her briefcase lay scuffed on the steps, papers rumbling inside, but she didn't lunge for it. Her arm was locked in the officer's grip, but her body was steady, unyielding, as if the stone beneath her shoes had fused with her bones. The taller officer barked again. "Do you hear me? You're under arrest." Alexandra didn't answer. She inhaled once, slow and measured, eyes fixed forward. That single breath carried more weight than any protest. The silence unsettled them. Crowds sense imbalance like animals do, and the imbalance was clear. 3 armed men shouting, one woman standing still. Murmurs swelled. A law student near the rail whispered, She hasn't said a word. Look at her. The officer shook her arm, trying to provoke. Say something, he snapped. His voice cracked, raw and impatient. But Alexandra's silence wasn't passive. It was calculated. Years of boardrooms had taught her. The quietest person at the table often holds the sharpest blade. Years of courtrooms had reminded her, stillness bends juries faster than fury. Now, years of discrimination stitched it all together, making her silence its own form of judgment. In the hush between shouts, her memory wandered. She was 16 again, standing in a courthouse lobby in Charlotte. She had worn her Sunday best, a neat dress, polished shoes, waiting for her parents who were late. A clerk spotted her and hissed, "This space is for guests only." Minutes later, she was escorted out onto the sidewalk, shame burning her chest while strangers stared. That sting never left. It was there when she applied for clerkships and was told she didn't look the part. It was there when she argued her first case and opposing counsel smirked, asking if she was assisting the real lawyer. It was here now, standing on the courthouse steps as officers called her trespasser. But this time, shame didn't burn, power did. She turned her head slowly, just enough for her gaze to meet the crowd. Not frantic, not pleading, simply steady, asking them silently, "Do you see this?" They did. Phones hovered higher. One man muttered, "She's stronger than they know." Another whispered, "She's holding court without a bench." The officer gripping her arm growled, "Stop staring like that." His words tumbled out clumsy, as if he feared her stillness more than he feared any shout. Alexandra blinked once, unhurried. Then, finally, her lips parted, voice low but resonant. "You mistake silence for weakness, but silence remembers." The crowd shifted. A chill rolled across the steps. It was the first time she had spoken since the slap, and already the dynamic bent. The officers had the weapons, the radios, the badges, but she had the room. "Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Have you ever used silence as your power? Type yes if you know the strength of staying calm when others expect you to break." Because Alexandra Reed wasn't breaking, she was building, and the officers had no idea they were the ones being judged. The courthouse steps had become a stage, and the crowd was no longer just background. They were witnesses, each with a phone, each with a pulse quickening at the injustice unfolding in front of them. A young man near the front adjusted his tie nervously, his phone raised chest high. He was a first-year law student, supposed to be shadowing arguments that morning. Instead, his camera lens framed a lesson he'd never forget. His whisper bled into the mic. 3 cops, 1 woman, no resistance. This is what bias looks like. Beside him, an older woman in a navy dress gasped when she recognized the beige coat. She leaned toward her husband. "That's Alexandra Reed," she muttered, voice trembling. She's supposed to be on the bench today." Her husband frowned. "The judge?" He pulled out his phone, too, pressing record. Further back, 2 journalists who had arrived to cover the case scribbled furiously in notepads before realizing words weren't enough. They lifted cameras, shutters clicking, capturing every angle of the officer's grip, the fallen briefcase, the unflinching woman. Not all witnesses were quiet. "Let her go," a voice shouted from the edge of the steps. A young mother, holding her toddler's hand, had stepped forward. "She hasn't done anything." The child tugged at her sleeve, confused, but the mother's eyes burned with clarity. The taller officer barked, "Step back." His tone snapped like a whip, but the command didn't land. Instead, it bounced off the crowd, fueling whispers that turned into murmurs, murmurs that began to harden into outrage. On the far left, a man in a gray suit still filmed steadily, jaw clenched. He wasn't just any bystander. His name was Thomas Ellis, a junior clerk for the district court. He knew exactly who Alexandra Reed was. He had seen her name on the docket, had prepared files for her hearing that morning. His heart hammered as he realized. The people attacking her weren't just humiliating a woman, they were dismantling the court's integrity itself. He lowered his phone just long enough to speak, voice carrying across the steps. "She's not trespassing," he said firmly. "She's scheduled to preside today." Gasps tore through the crowd. Phones jerked higher. The officers stiffened, exchanging quick glances, but Alexandra didn't move. Her silence remained, her gaze locked forward, as if daring them to deny what was now public truth. "Morvoise Rose. Why are you grabbing her?" "She's the judge. This is assault." The officers' control thinned like smoke in wind. They had power in their badges, but the witnesses had multiplied, each camera a gavel striking against injustice. And yet, Alexandra still refused to turn her silence into noise. She let the crowd speak. She let their outrage grow. Because she knew real power isn't claimed in panic. It's revealed in patience. The woman in the navy dress clasped her husband's arm. "They're going to regret this," she whispered, though everyone around already knew. "Before we continue, what would you have done if you were there? Stand back or step forward? Drop your answer in the comments, because silence or action both leave marks." And here, on these marble steps, the marks were already permanent. The crowd's voices were no longer whispers. They were questions hurled like stones, each one striking the officers harder than Alexandra's silence ever could. "She's the judge. You can't treat her like that." Is this how justice looks? But the officers doubled down. Embarrassment turned to anger, and anger turned to force. The tallest officer yanked her arm higher, twisting it slightly as if pain could silence dignity. "You're not walking in there," he barked. "Not today, not ever." Phones captured everything. The red recording lights dotted the crowd like watchful eyes, refusing to blink. Another officer, the one who had slapped her, stepped closer, voice loud enough to echo against the courthouse columns. "This woman is under investigation," he lied, words flung with reckless confidence. "We have reason to believe she's carrying fraudulent documents." Gasps cut through the steps. A teenager in the front row muttered, "That's not true. I saw her ID when she walked past security last week." His voice cracked, but it didn't matter. Truth had found its way into the air. Still, the officer pressed on. He jabbed a finger toward the briefcase lying on the stone. "Evidence," he declared. "Probably stolen." The briefcase, scuffed but intact, sat as silent witness. Inside were the files she was meant to review from the bench that very morning. The crowd didn't know that detail yet, but instinct told them the accusation was hollow. From the back, Thomas Ellis, the junior clerk, raised his voice again. "That's the judge's docket," he shouted. "I prepped it myself last night. That's her case." The steps erupted. Voices overlapped. Some shouted for release. Others demanded names and badge numbers. One woman's voice pierced through, "You're destroying your own credibility." But instead of stepping back, the officers called for backup. One of them pressed a radio to his shoulder. "Dispatch. We have a trespasser, possibly hostile. Request immediate support." The lie rang sharp, but Alexandra didn't flinch. She didn't twist, didn't resist. Her stillness mocked their chaos. The officer growled into her ear, low enough only she could hear. "You think this crowd will save you? They'll forget you by tonight." Her lips curved not in a smile, but in the faintest flicker of certainty. She had seen men like him her entire life. Men who mistook uniforms for absolution. Men who believed power was the volume of their voice. But real power was measured in what survived after the shouting stopped. The murmurs swelled into outrage now. "Release her," someone shouted. "She's innocent," another voice added. "This is abuse of power." And with every cry, the officers' control crumbled further. They had drawn a line, but the crowd was erasing it one voice at a time. Alexandra lifted her chin, finally speaking, voice steady as the marble under her feet. "You just accused a federal judge of fraud." The words sliced the air clean. Silence hit like a wave, even the crowd pausing at the sheer gravity of it. The officers froze, eyes darting, their confidence unraveling. The escalation had reached its peak, and Alexandra hadn't raised her voice once. Before we continue, type "justice" in the comments if you believe truth always finds its way through lies, because here, on the courthouse steps, the truth was already pressing against the walls. The officer's radio still crackled at his shoulder, but no one was listening to dispatch anymore. All eyes were on Alexandra Reed, her words hanging in the air like a verdict. "You just accused a federal judge of fraud." The crowd had gone still, the way a courtroom freezes when the gavel strikes. But silence only enraged the officers further. The tallest one spat, "Judge, don't make me laugh." He bent down, snatched up her briefcase from the steps, and with one sharp motion, ripped it open. Files spilled across the marble like broken promises, legal briefs, stamped motions, official seals glinting in the morning light. Gasps erupted. A man shouted, "Those are court documents." A woman's voice trembled. He just tampered with evidence. But the officer wasn't done. He grabbed one of the papers, waved it high as if parading contraband. Then, with deliberate contempt, he tore it clean down the middle. The sound of ripping paper cut sharper than the earlier slap. Phones zoomed in. The crowd roared. Outrageous. Get his badge number. You can't do that. The officer sneered, tossing the shredded file at Alexandra's feet. Fraudulent. Just like you. Her stillness deepened. She didn't stoop to gather the papers. She didn't flinch as the crowd swelled with fury. She simply met his eyes, gaze unwavering. Another officer joined the assault. He yanked her arm harder, twisting it behind her back. "We're done here," he barked. "Cuff her." The metallic clink of handcuffs echoed as he fumbled at his belt. The crowd surged forward a step, fury boiling over. Thomas Ellis, the clerk, raised his voice, desperate. "This is unlawful. That's the presiding judge. You'll destroy your careers." But the officers ignored him. The tallest one snapped, "She's nobody. Just another trespasser pretending to be important." That word nobody fell heavy. Alexandra's memory flashed again. A loop of every time she'd been reduced to less than she was. 16 in Charlotte. 29 outside the closed hearing. 35 with the bailiff's whisper. Always nobody. Always erased. Not today. As the officer clamped her wrist tighter, Alexandra's voice broke the noise. Calm. Razor sharp. "You've just destroyed federal property. And now, in front of witnesses, you're attempting to detain a judge without cause." Her words cut through the chaos. The handcuffs hung frozen mid-air. Even the officer who slapped her faltered, the metal glint trembling between hesitation and pride. The crowd erupted. "She's right. Unlawful arrest. Let her go." But the officers, faces flushed with stubborn rage, pressed forward. One snarled, "Then we'll let the holding cell decide." And with that, the line was crossed. It was no longer just insult, no longer just humiliation. It was an assault on the very system they claimed to defend.